Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emily Siebenborn, and I head the Sustainable Finance Capital Markets teams of BNP Paribas for the Americas. And I am a co-coordinator of the Green Enabling Task Force. Today, I will be moderating the discussion alongside Anne-Claire Lejeune, my co-coordinator of the task force. So Anne-Claire, maybe over to you.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Anne-Claire Lejeune. I'm an originator at Natixis, supporting our clients, basically corporates and investors, with advisory services and structuring sustainable finance instruments for all asset classes, with a particular focus on mining and metals. And Natixis was very happy to participate to the co-coordination of this task force together with BNP.
Today, we're joined by two guest speakers who will be discussing the real-world application of green enabling and provide investment insights on how to harness green enabling. Félicité Godin from Vulcan Energy is joining us, and we also have Félix-Antoine Prévost from la Caisse des dépôts et placements du Québec. Félicité, Félix-Antoine, handing over to you as well now for a brief introduction.
Hi everyone, I'm very pleased to be joining this webinar from Perth in Western Australia, where it's 9:30 p.m. So I will make sure I stay awake and fully energized. But yes, I'm the group CFO of Vulcan Energy Resources. We're a dual-listed company in Australia and Germany, and we're developing the Lionheart lithium and renewable energy project in the Rhine Valley in Germany. Pleased to be here.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here, Emily and Claire. Thank you for the invitation. Félix-Antoine Prévost, I'm a senior advisor at La Caisse. In case not everyone is familiar with La Caisse, let me do just a high-level overview. So we're global investor based in Quebec, Canada. We have close to 500 billion Canadian dollars in AUM. And on the public side, we invest in public equity and public credit. And on the private space, we invest in infrastructure, real estate, private equity, and private credit. Most of our investments are private and managed internally. And so this gives us quite a strong hold on our investments and thus allows us to exercise some leadership with regards to climate change and sustainability more broadly.
Thank you, Félix-Antoine and Félicité. So for everyone listening to that webinar, you're going to be able to ask questions throughout the discussion. And the panelists and ourselves, we are going to address them along the way. So please do not hesitate. You do have a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen normally. So to start, we wanted to give you a brief refresher on what is the Green Enabling Project Guidance document so we can set the scene. So what was the objective of that guidance? Well, it's pretty much to provide a guidance, as the name says, for the financing via green bonds of green enabling projects. And those projects are critical to the value chain of green projects themselves, but were not necessarily always considered green themselves in an explicit manner. The Green Enabling Project Guidance was published in 2024 and was based on the recommendation of a dedicated task force who worked on it for more than a year, so a task force of 81 members. And it's also based on existing official and market guidances on green enabling activities. Following publication in 2024, we worked on an additional set of guidance, which are a Q&A, which is in appendix, and a example checklist in Excel format that was published in 2025. The Green Enabling Project guidance is actually based on two different sets of criteria. The first one are specific criteria that encompass both the necessity for clear, quantifiable, and attributable environmental benefits, as well as the management of related environmental and social risks. Second bucket of the criteria is the transparency on end users, should the end users be known or not. And both attributes are necessary to qualify as green enabling, and Anne-Claire is going to provide a deeper overview of those criteria as well. As part of the illustrative examples and counterexamples that we published in 2025, we covered mining and metals, and in particular lithium mining. chemicals and specialty chemicals, the ICT and telecommunication networks, in particular smart mobility, and the manufacturing of industrial parts and components. And here, the examples we used were the manufacturing of grid power cables. One other sector that is very relevant to green enabling is the building and construction supplies and equipment sector, noting that those 5 sectors are not necessarily exhaustive, right? Those were the key ones that were identified at this stage in the guidance, but it can be much more broad overall. So with that being said, I'm going to hand over to Anne-Claire.
Yes, thank you very much, Emily. So again, this guidance strives to solve a missing piece of sustainable finance by defining and providing guidance for green enabling projects. So as explained by Emily, there are 2 attributes that needs to be met to qualify the eligibility of a green project. First, specific criteria. Secondly, transparency on end use. And let's dive into these requirements. So the first attribute is around specific criteria. There are 4 of them defined in the guidance. The first one is around necessity of the green enabling project in a green value chain. The prevention, second one is around the prevention of carbon lock-in. The third one is that green enabling project should provide tangible environmental benefits. And the third one is the mitigation of environmental and social risks. So if we let's dive into the specific requirements with some examples for each of them. So around the concept of necessity. Again, what is provided in the guidance is that the green enabling project should be a necessary component for a green project's value chain, but it is not necessarily a conveyor of direct positive environmental impact on its own. So let's take an example. With, for instance, the lithium mining and processing, that is a necessary to the manufacture of lithium batteries that are a key component of electric vehicles value chains. But again, here the lithium processing is not the direct conveyor of a direct positive environmental impact on its own. It is just a necessary component in the value chain. So that's the first example. The second, the first specific criteria. The second one is around carbon lock-in. So green enabling projects should not lead to locking in high carbon intensive activities. And this assessment should be made relatively to other technologically feasible and or commercially viable solution. The complexity here is that there is no single definition of carbon lock-in, because of course, carbon lock-in depends on many factors, and in particular, the local context where the activity is taking place. So what is recommended in the guidance is that the issuer should provide more information on the risk of carbon lock-in by providing an assessment and that is made in light of a national or regional context. First point, and second one also with related to the sectorial transition plans. So again, carbon lock-in should be, I would say, the absence of carbon lock-in should be made in the light of local context and sectorial transition plans. The third criteria is around the tangible environmental benefits. So green enabling projects must provide a clear, quantifiable, and attributable environmental benefit, and the issuer should be transparent about this benefit. It can be based either on actual impacts or estimates. And the issuer can, of course, disclose qualitative KPIs, but it is strongly recommended to also use quantitative KPIs, such as, for instance, avoided emissions. And if the issuer is providing such KPIs, it is strongly recommended to disclose the key underlying methodologies that are used. So let's take again an example. If an issuer that is manufacturing specialty chemicals that are used in windows insulations, and these windows are leading to more energy efficiency in the building sector. This issuer should be transparent on the avoided emission enabled thanks to its productions. And being transparent means describing the solution itself. So here again, we are talking about manufacturing of specialty chemical used in windows insulation. And we should compare this solution with a baseline scenario. And the baseline scenario that shows how future emission would have evolved if a specific solution was not used in this given context. So again, if we compare a solution with a baseline scenario, we have, as a result, a sense of what are the avoided emissions. But I would say the transparency should not stop here, because as soon as we know what are the avoided emissions possible thanks to this solution, the question around the attribution should take place. And the issuer should be transparent about its approach and underlying assumptions. So here, the question will be the attribution process of the avoided emissions along the various stakeholders of the value chain. So, is the specialty chemical manufacturer claiming the full avoided emission that are enabled by the use of these efficient windows? Or will the issuer only claim a part of these avoided emissions? The guidance does not recommend any I would say, attribution factor in specifically. It is just required to be transparent on the assumptions that are made by the issuer. And let's look at the fourth criteria. And here, what is required is that the issuer should be basically, green enabling projects should demonstrate that they are appropriately managing identified environmental and social risks. They can do it by using relevant market standards or taxonomies. Let's take an example. If the issuer wants to demonstrate, I would say, robust social practices, they can use, for instance, a EU taxonomy minimum social safeguards. That's just an example. There are many of them, but just for you to know that the mitigation of environmental and social practices should be made in the light of market standards. So if we now look at the second component on the that is required in the guidance around transparency on end use. So here we have two scenarios. First one, the end user is known. And if it's known, the issuer should disclose what is this end user. And the second scenario is when the end user is not known. And here, the issuer can rely on external assumption to demonstrate the role of the enabling project in a given market segment. So for example, if we take again the example of lithium, the issuer could demonstrate that today a majority of the global demand of lithium is used for low carbon end use. And here the issuer could rely on many external sources, for instance, such as IEA. But again, the issuer can go a little bit further in demonstrating the possible end use of a given green enabling project. And if we take a look to the specificities of lithium, the issuer could have a look to the processing specificities of lithium that can give us an idea of where the lithium will be used. For instance, we know that lithium hydroxide is very likely to be used in batteries. And when we look at other producing methods, such as lithium technical grade spodumene, it is very likely to be used in ceramics production. So again, the issuer can rely on broad market data and give a little bit more, I would say, a precision depending on the specificities of the green enabling projects. And again, what is required in the guidance is the transparency. So now, this is the overview of the market guidance. Should you have any question, please let us know. And I will now hand over to Félix-Antoine to know more about why did La Caisse incorporate green enabling in its new climate strategy, and what is your approach? Félix-Antoine, I guess you are on mute.
Sure. So if I step back before going directly into what enablers are, because they really fit naturally into the overall climate strategy. So over the past few years, we made some significant progress with regards to portfolio decarbonization. So since 2017, we reduced our carbon intensity by 70%. And so when we refreshed our climate strategy last year, we made a very conscious shift, moving away from carbon metrics towards real economy decarbonization. And concretely, that translates into a goal to invest 400 billion Canadian dollars by 2030 in assets that we call climate action. And within the climate action, we have two pillars. The first one is decarbonization, where the focus is really on transition plans. We want our portfolio companies to be more climate mature, regardless of the sector they operate in. And the second pillar is climate solutions, where we intend to invest in businesses for which the business model is aligned with the low carbon economy. And so within that, we have traditional green assets like electrified transport and renewables, but we also expanded into three new teams: adaptation and resilience, nature-based solutions, and enabling technologies. And so I'm glad you explained what enablers are. Essentially, they're the backbone of the energy transitions. For us, including them in our strategy was the natural step forward for a few reasons. One is that as investors, we believe diversification is key. And that also applies within the energy transition landscape. And so by including enablers, we were able to expand the scope of investment outside of only a narrow set of green end use. We also see portfolio synergies. So enablers are very often solution providers or suppliers of green businesses or transitioning businesses, some of which are already in our portfolio. And so over time, we see opportunity to connect the dots and create value on both parts. And lastly, I think it will help us increase our strike force within the organization. Previously, our climate strategy was focused on green assets. And so for some asset classes for which we're more oriented towards asset-light, service-oriented businesses, these teams had few entry points into climate investing. And so now with including enablers, they will be able to contribute meaningfully to our climate change objectives. And so this will increase impact. I think the ICMA guidance was very helpful because it provided with clarity and transparency. Clarity is essential for institutional investors like us. We face greenwashing risks and a lot of scrutiny from civil society. And so using a market recognized framework like the one provided by ICMA was very helpful because it allows us to better explain our investment decisions both internally and externally. I think the guidance is still relatively new. It was published in 2024. So it will take some time for the market to mature, to build precedents. But the businesses are already there. And we believe they're expected to grow rapidly because they are supported by strong secular trends.
Thank you very much, Félix-Antoine, for that detailed answer. I will now have a question for Felicity, actually, and on your view regarding green enabling. Because Vulcan is a pure player for both being a renewable energy producer, but also a green enabler for your activities in mining and metal. And so I have actually three questions for you. The first is, why is the concept of green enabling being particularly suited to your business model? And I'm also wondering, how was that concept being integrated into the articulation of your financing, in particular when it comes to debt and equity? And finally, what were the benefits and challenges that you actually encountered throughout the way?
Sure, thank you. So as I mentioned before, Vulcan Energy, we're building the world's first carbon neutral integrated lithium and renewable energy business. And we will be producing a local, low-cost source of carbon neutral lithium for the European electric vehicle batteries. So as you mentioned, we are a green project, and we've been designed to be a green project from the beginning, and that's one of our company values and a primary objective of the project. So we will produce battery-grade lithium and renewable heat and power using hot geothermal brines that are underneath the Rhine Valley bordering Germany and France. And we avoid the high emissions often associated with traditional open-cut mining methods and evaporation ponds. So this design delivers low water use, minimal land disturbance, and a very short supply chain of only 130 kilometres. So as well as being a pure green player, Vulcan's also a green enabler. The sustainable lithium that we're producing will decarbonise European battery and electric vehicle supply chain. And as I mentioned before, we will be the first fully domestic integrated lithium supply chain in Europe. So how did this impact our financing? Well, we had a very busy December. So in December last year, we announced a 2.2 billion euro financing package. This included a combination of debt and equity financing. The package included strong support from European and German government agencies, commercial banks, and strategic industrial partners. The European Investment Bank was one of our cornerstone financiers. The EIB's involvement signals the strategic importance of our project. And other key institutions involved included a number of global export credit agencies, those from Canada, Denmark, Italy, France, and my home country, Australia. And the German government, through its Critical Raw Materials Fund, managed by KfW, were strategic equity investors. I should also mention BNPP and Natixis were part of the syndicate. So as part of the green financing process and working with Natixis as our ESG advisor, we were assessed by S&P Global Ratings and awarded a dark green shade. This is the highest ever rating received by a metals and mining company globally. And this really highlighted the project's sustainability credentials to our lenders and equity investors. So overall, I think because being a green project and a green enabler is so core to our company, and I would have to say we didn't really have too many challenges because it was inherent in the design and nature of our project, but significant benefits. So we attracted ESG-driven equity investors. We were able to attract a broad range of financial, government and commercial institutions. And feedback I received is that the credit case was materially strengthened given our decarbonisation benefits.
Thank you very much, Felicity. And so, I think we have already a few questions, right, that maybe we can take some time to address. In terms of the first question we had, this is related to the attribution factor of impact. So question is, how can the attribution be computed when the green enabling project is just one of many components of the final green product? For example, the specialty chemical in the window insulation will be attributed the avoided emission of the full window, or is it a pro rata approach? So here I'm opening maybe the floor. If Felicity, Félix, Antoine, you have maybe some takes there from both the issue side, because eventually it is somehow kind of the same issue that we can face in other sectors such as mining and metal, and having the investor perspective on what is actually needed in terms of impact and attribution factor will be also quite useful. So opening the floor here.
Félix, Antoine, I think you're on mute.
Sure. Maybe I can take it briefly. I think from an investor perspective, we're looking for estimation and not false precision. I think we want to see some order of magnitude in this attribution factor. But again, if we don't have the exact number, it's not necessarily something that will block or pose a significant risk in terms of greenwashing risk, as long as we believe we have some strong evidence that there is an attribution factor and that it is above zero, significantly above zero.
And maybe, if I may, maybe I can complement from a theoretical perspective. So there are several options here. The issuer may indeed claim a full attribution factor. That's the first possible. But if so, again, the issuer should be fully transparent about this, I would say, methodological standpoint. The issuer may also claim, I would say, a share of the avoided emissions, and to do so, there are several ways to propose an attribution factor. So, for instance, if we take again the example of specialty chemical, a way to claim some avoided emission would be to question to which extent a specialty chemical, what is its weight with regards to the full induced emission of the windows manufacturing. So comparing the weight of the induced emission of specialty chemical in the full carbon footprint of the windows, the first option. And another option would be, for instance, to try to measure the economic value of the specialty chemical in the manufacturing process of windows. And for instance, an example could be to question what is the cost to produce specialty chemical, and how does it compare with the total cost of specialty of windows manufacturing. And here, depending on the cost or the induced emissions weight, the issuer could claim different attribution factors. So just from a technical perspective, that's all the options that could be contemplated by issuers.
And I guess to maybe conclude on that question, I think it's recognized, right, quite widely that there is no commonly accepted methodology to establish attribution factor. And so obviously in many aspects, it will be, or many situations, it will be quite challenging to actually be very precise in terms of the exact role of a specific component in an environmental benefit. So here what really matters, and I think that's very much the essence of this guidance, is transparency. What is the methodology used? What is the attribution factor, if used at all? And if not used, what the rationale behind it? And I think this will be very important for investors to make sure they understand the impact that eventually is being reported, but also for the wider market to understand the methodological aspect of it and the foundation of the calculation. So with that, we have a second question that we can potentially address now as well. So the question is, how can an issuer show, in the case of an unknown user, that the end user will indeed be positively and not contributing to negative environmental impact? And is there any safeguarding mechanism? So here, the question very much is, how can we ensure that if not all end users are known, how can we make sure that there is not a negative, like fundamentally negative impact from a portion of those end users across the value chain? So here, maybe Felicity, is it something that you would like to answer? I'm thinking that could be one of the cases that we often see in mining and metals, and obviously lithium is widely used for car batteries, but not only. So that's probably a case that you have encountered as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think in our situation, the exercise of identifying green users was actually relatively straightforward, because to support our financing, we secured binding offtake agreements with European and global companies, car manufacturers, including Stellantis, and also battery manufacturers, Umicore, LG Energy Solutions. So therefore, the vast majority of the end use of our lithium is for low carbon applications for the manufacture of batteries for electric vehicles. But yeah, if we weren't in that situation and we didn't need to secure those offtakes, as Anne-Claire mentioned previously, we could have relied on market data, such as from the International Energy Agency or Wood Mackenzie, because currently 66% of global demand for lithium is for low carbon end use, and that's expected to increase to 80% by 2030, which is obviously a very high percentage given the increasing demand for electric vehicles and battery energy storage solutions.
Great, thank you very much, Felicity, for the answer. I think that now we can potentially move to the next section of our discussion, which is related to the concept of necessity and end users. So a green enabling project is necessary for an enabled green project value chain to be developed and or implemented. That's very much the fundamental concept of the guidance. That being said, value chains are very often very long, can be very complex with multiple components. So here we'll have a question for Félix Antoine. What those necessary means in the context of green enabling, and what do investors need to actually evidence this concept of necessity?
Sure. It's a great question, because the criterion of necessary is at the heart of enabling projects. But there is room for interpretation, and so one needs to apply judgment. I think for us, necessary means that without this part or component, the green end use simply could not exist or be implemented at scale. So take electric vehicles. There are many components in an EV that are identical to ICE engines: the seats, the windshield, the air conditioning. What really makes it different is the powertrain. And so there's the battery pack, the battery management system, and the electric motor. Without these components, you simply don't have an EV. And so that passes the necessary test. And from there, we move up the value chain. So to have a battery, you need a cathode, electrolyte. These are necessary. And upstream of that, you need critical materials like lithium. I think that's where discipline matters. You need to set boundaries, because you can quickly end up qualifying everything and effectively the entire economy, which is not the objective here. And so I think one needs to understand the sector, and especially to understand whether there are any other credible alternatives in the market to deliver the same decarbonization outcome at scale. If there aren't, then probably the enabling technology that is being considered is necessary. Let me take a real-world example. We had a case recently in the aviation sector. Aviation is a hard-to-abate sector. There are a few credible decarbonization pathways today. Sustainable aviation fuel could deliver the greatest potential, but today it is constrained by costs. SAF is currently 3 times more expensive than kerosene. and it is expected to remain with a premium up to mid-century. And so that explains why SAF is only 1% of total fuel jet use. So what remains is really technology. And actually, according to ICAO, technological improvements could deliver up to a third of emissions reduction in the net zero scenario. And the levers that are currently available are essentially two things. One is to optimize operations, and second is to increase energy efficiency, especially with regards to engine performance. And so that's why, within this context, we believe that next generation engines in aircraft really stand out as critical elements in the sector's decarbonization's pathway. Because they're one of the only few opportunities that are out there today.
Thank you very much, Félix Antoine, for all these very interesting perspectives. We wanted to ask a question to Felicity around the green enabling project and the complexity around the demonstration of end uses, but it has already been asked by the question, so that's a good way to see that your questions are very useful. Thank you very much. Maybe I can just try to bounce back on what we previously said. And especially try to answer to the question around any safeguard mechanisms that can be applied should in the case of negative environmental impacts. I guess the guidelines, the guidance does not provide any safeguards mechanisms here, but in any case, again, what is required in the guidance is to provide transparency. And I would say that the more transparent the issuer can be, the more informed the investor can take an informed decision. So that's just what I wanted to say. Is no specific safeguards, because basically it's very difficult to put in place safeguards. But again, what is required is transparency around that topic. So I don't know if anyone on the floor want to bounce back on that, or maybe I can have to you, Emily.
No, absolutely. And I mean, to your point, the purpose of this guidance was to make it usable by the market as well, right? So making sure that we have this framework that can be used for a very wide application or types of application, while making sure that greenwashing risk were actually covered as well. That being said, and we've seen it with a number of other instruments in the market, right? It's very complicated to have hard exclusion criteria for some elements, especially when all parameters are not known. And so for that reason, the guidance is very complete because it does cover environmental and social risk for sure, and a degree of transparency requirement when it comes to end users. But it would have been very complicated to have something in place with a hard exclusion related to any kind of end use related to high emitting activities, just because there are many cases where not all off-takers are known, not all end users are known, and where a portion of the activities will be used by activities that will be either high emitting or not generating environmental benefits in their own. And so for that reason, we like the task force focused on transparency aspect and making sure that stakeholders would understand why this project or why this green enabling project brings benefit and why it is worth being included in green transaction, even though all aspects are not necessarily known by heart. So just to maybe close up on this, I know it's paraphrasing a little bit what Anne-Claire has mentioned, but also expressing my agreement, I guess, on the topic. So I will have then now a question to Félix Antoine. So, and that's obviously on the same topic. And because all end users are not known, we were wondering what is the right share of green users that should be known to justify a complete or partial funding of green enabling projects, and what do investors need for your business case? What do you need to know? And what's the degree of transparency and what's the right level of transparency that you would expect to make your case?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's no single or universal threshold, and I would totally agree with what was mentioned by Anne-Claire and Emily. What really matters is credibility and transparency, and this will necessarily depend on where the company sits within the value chain. If it's more downstream, close to end use, we would expect a high level of visibility, so offtake agreements, clear client lists, or at least some level of comfort that the product is being used for green applications. Now, if the company sits higher up, is more upstream, that level of visibility might not be realistic. And so in this case, we will rely much more on market research and trying to understand how the demand is structured. I don't think we need 100% end use. Where appropriate, we will use a pro rata approach where we will qualify a company based on its share of green revenue in the green end segment. I think this approach allows us to be pragmatic and credible without also overstating impact. I think it's important that companies themselves do a large part of this work. At a minimum, companies should be able to identify or articulate where they sit in the value chain and how they contribute to enabling the transition. It's not only an investor requirement. I think it's a strategic exercise. It shows that the company is positioning itself to benefit from the tailwinds that the transition will bring.
Thank you very much, Felix Antoine. And maybe if it's okay for you, maybe we can just bounce back because it's related to what you have just explained. We have currently a question on the chat asking what could be the view of the guidance, and then maybe you as an investor, it may be interesting to know what you say is should the manufacturer, an issuer financing semiconductor wafers manufacturing under green enabling, which goes to manufacture integrated circuits to be used in IoT sensor for renewable energies, but also to increase the energy efficiency of data centers. And the question is around the fact that with end users being IoT and data center, which themselves as a standalone are not green projects, can such financing be considered positively, making a link to the value chain of green enabling projects?
I think it's always a case-by-case thing. I would say in general, I think market shares for the green revenue should be significant, right? If in this case only 2% of the wafers are used for the transition and 60% is used for data centers, then maybe the point of negative impacts is a strong argument. And so I think it's always a case-by-case basis, but we would certainly expect to have a significant amount of the proportions that are used for green use.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe, Emily, maybe you want to...
No, I was going to add that this question is very interesting because I think it also touch bases on the place in the value chain, right? Because in that specific example, the attendee asked about wafers that would be used for integrated circuits to be used in IoT sensors for renewable energy and energy efficiency specifically, right? And so my view is that here, if this end use, which is related to renewable energy and energy efficiency, is sure, then this is bringing environmental benefits in itself, right? And so these wafers could be indeed considered green. Now, whether a data center is green or not, I think it will depend on a number of different parameters, right? On PUE, on whether water is managed appropriately, on what will be the sources of energy. And so obviously there is no right or wrong answers, but nonetheless, in that specific example, transparency so as to the location in value chain and whether those wafers will be used specifically for renewable energy/energy efficiency will be very important as a detail, because it will already provide a degree of indication on what will be the attribution factor. So that will be just my my additional answer specifically for that question.
And maybe to bounce back on always the complexity around the concrete clear environmental benefits, maybe I can ask a question to Felicity, because again, in the guidance, what is required is to demonstrate that the green enabling projects provide clear, quantifiable, and attributable environmental benefit, even if these projects are not providing direct environmental benefits on its own. So that's always a little bit a complex exercise to pursue. Felicity, what kind of benefits should be demonstrated, and how shall it be? How did you do, Vulcan, on that? And was your KPI, were your KPIs only carbon centered, or did you also disclose the other KPIs?
Yeah, well, we committed to report on a best effort basis on a number of KPIs that included climate focus, but also other areas. And so, for example, we did calculations of CO2 avoided annually in our value chain emissions. We could verify that by calculating the avoided CO2 between an electric car and an internal combustion car engine using data published by the European Commission. We also have KPIs around demonstrating the environmental benefit of Vulcan versus legacy mining methods. And this has been calculated using industry life cycle assessment data, quantifying our benefit that I mentioned previously around water and land use impacts compared to other traditional forms of mining. We're also producing renewable heat, and so there are related avoided emissions which can be verified by demonstrating evidence that our emission intensity of our geothermal meets requirements for the renewable energy classification. And then also through our environmental and social impact assessment, we demonstrated that there are no major impacts above minor for the project, and aligned with Equator principles and IFC performance standards. I will say that social impact was really important, especially to the EIB and our financiers. Obviously, mining can be a sensitive topic, and so the social impact was very important as well.
Thank you very much, Felicity. That's very interesting. And maybe to bounce back on this topic, Félix Antoine, what is your view here? What are you looking at La Caisse, and what do you need on the investor side?
Sure. I think the expectation is to have a clear, quantified environmental benefit, and that starts with having a measurable baseline. You need a baseline, and you need to be able to measure the reduction compared to that baseline. And I think importantly, that improvement should be material. If, say, we had a project which would deliver a 1% emissions reduction compared to a business as usual scenario, then maybe that the case wouldn't be so strong. I think that's it. We're looking for estimation, again, not false precision. All these assessments inevitably rely on assumptions, scenarios, and that's fine. I think what really matters is that we have all the inputs in place to have a good level of comfort and the fact that the activity is truly enabling the transition and bringing benefit. I think I like real world example, and I started earlier on the aviation sector, which is quite complex because it could provide carbon lock-in, or there's risk because it's a high emitting sector. But nevertheless, aerospace and aviation is expected to grow over the next years, and so we need to have a good understanding of how we can decarbonize this sector, which is a hard to abate sector. So again, there are some companies like CFM or General Electric that really designed and made some improvement with regards to engines, and especially they designed this geared turbofan, which is essentially a gearbox between the fan and the rest of the engine, which allows the compressor and the fan to rotate at a different speed, which is optimal. In conventional engines, the shafts rotate at the same speed, and so it's not optimal. And with this new design, it also allows for less compressors, and so it decreases the weight. And the combined effects of these improvements bring a reduction in terms of emissions compared to conventional engines of about 15 to 25% reduction. And this translates directly into CO2 emissions per passenger kilometer. So we believe this is material enough to consider this specific technology as enabling the decarbonization of a high emitting sector like aviation. I think today most benefits are focused on GHG emissions, so either avoided or reduced. But I wouldn't be surprised if we would see cases where we would have other metrics like grid flexibility or grid stability. I think what really matters again is that the benefit is clearly linked to the enabling project.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I think we still have time for some Q&As. So should you have any question, please share them in the chat.
And in the meantime, I will maybe complement one small element of what Félix-Antoine you've just mentioned, especially related to the fact that it's not only greenhouse gas emissions, right? That's true that in the first edition of the Green Enabling Project Guidance, we did focus on climate mitigation and avoided emissions because that's the most commonly reported metric and something that is very important in the way investors and issuers look at their impact. But Green Bond Principles explicitly recognize several broad categories of eligible projects, right? And green enabling theoretically can fit into all of these. And so that could cover not only climate mitigation and adaptation, but also natural resources conservation, water conservation, biodiversity, pollution prevention and control. And even though the guidance is indeed in that first version focused on climate, those other environmental aspects could potentially be considered, again, subject to the same criteria related to attributable impact and demonstrable impact. But nonetheless, that's something that is definitely possible. Just wanted to rebound on what you've just mentioned, Félix-Antoine, because that's indeed a question we have received in a few occasions in the past. And so in the meantime, we have received two questions. And so the first one is actually, I think, quite closely related to what I've just mentioned, which is, could this guidance be applied in the marine context, despite there not being any explicit reference to ocean marine? So yes, the idea is that indeed the the Green Enabling Guidance document is closely related to the Green Bond Principles. It's actually mentioned in the Green Bond Principles itself. It's not a separate category, but feeds into all of the potentially eligible categories of the Green Bond Principles. And here, indeed, anything related to biodiversity or marine resources or natural conservation could indeed be considered eligible. So beyond any topic related to greenhouse gas emissions mitigation and avoidance. So that's something, if robust and if demonstrated, could indeed feed into it. So that would be my 2 cents, but open to the floor if someone else wants to add a little bit in there.
I think it's quite clear. I'm trying to look at the other questions that we have received. Maybe, Felix Antoine, if I may, we have a question around what you have just explained in the case of the airline engine example. And the question is, it would be interesting to hear what you think about the carbon lock-in risk here. How do you assess this?
Yes, I think, that's a good question. And we were, the lifespan of an airplane is quite long, and especially in bringing technology to the market also from R&D to commercial stage is quite long. And so, and there are no few credible alternatives in the short and medium run, either electric or hydrogen. And so that's why we view technological improvements, even though these new planes will be, flying for the next 20 years. We don't see any major breakthrough in other technological improvements in the next 20 years. And so that's why we try to be pragmatic here. But again, of course, it's a high emitting sector. And so aviation will continue to be emitting. In fact, emissions in absolute terms are expected to grow. It's the base case from IEA. We see an upward slope. So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to bounce back, and indeed we have said this previously, but it's true that it has been discussed while in the task force this notion around carbon lock-in, and that's the reason why at some point we agree that for sure the green enabling project should not lead to carbon lock-in, but this should be seen in the light of the commercially viable solutions, and that's really something that is important to bear in mind, because of course it varies a lot depending on the sectors and then the local context.
Yeah, I think the carbon lock-in happens when the technology brings more carbon, when there is a credible alternative out there that could be used. But in this case, there is none. So.
And I guess that's a good segue with one of the questions that we received as well regarding the difference between green enabling and climate transition projects, and maybe being cognizant that we only have 1 minute left. Maybe that will be the last question. So here, I think it's very important to keep in mind that green enabling projects are enablers, right? Without them, value chains do not happen, green projects do not happen. So they're really one of the channels of the value chain. Transition project like green project, they do have environmental benefits of their own, and then they fall under various guidance as published by ICMA. And so here, I think that the key aspect of green enabling is that green enabling projects should enable projects that will be eligible under the green bond principle, or at least be consistent with it, while respecting all of those aspects. ICMA has published very recently the Green Transition Bond Guidance as well, that do set separate set of criteria and safeguards that will be very focused on hard-to-abate sectors, for example, and transition projects that will not necessarily be covered in the same way by green enabling, because you don't have this necessarily this place in the value chain. Good example is that we have seen a few transition bonds being issued in the past, for example, related to gas transport pipelines. Those will be typical transition projects because you won't necessarily have the ability to have 100% hydrogen right now flowing into the systems. An example of a green enabling project will be, in that case, the manufacturing of power cable for grids. The manufacture itself is not necessarily providing environmental benefits, but the fact that it's used by utilities for electricity, and so used for electrification, will yield environmental benefits on its own. So that will be my 2 cents. But again, opening the floor for further comments before we maybe close off the discussion.
I think it was very clear, so maybe we can thank everyone for participating to this webinar, in particular Felix Antoine and Felicity.
Thank you.
And thank you. And thank you for all questions as well, and for listening to us.
Ouais.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.